Blood soaked through Jasmine Washington's running clothes as the police dog's jaws clamped on her arm. Officer Richard Davenport smirked. She reached for her legally concealed weapon. The dog lunged again. The gun fired. Screams echoed across Oakwood Park. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on stories of injustice and survival. Can an ordinary morning jog turn into a life-or-death struggle? Let's find out what happened to Jasmine that fateful day. Jasmine Washington started her day like any other Tuesday, lacing up her running shoes at 5:30 in the morning. At 34 years old, the respected hospital administrator had maintained this routine for years, finding peace in the quiet moments before sunrise at Oakwood Park in the affluent suburb of Westlake, Minnesota. As one of the few black residents in this predominantly white neighborhood, Jasmine had grown accustomed to the subtle glances, the clutched purses, and the occasional neighbor who would mistake her for household staff rather than a homeowner. Despite her professional success, the microaggressions were a constant reminder that some people would always see her skin color before seeing her credentials. As she jogged along her usual path, Jasmine's phone rang. It was her brother Marcus calling about their upcoming family reunion. "Yeah, I already bought my ticket to Atlanta," she told him, smiling at the thought of seeing her extended family. "Got that potato salad recipe from Grandma, too, so everyone better be ready." Their conversation was light-filled with laughter and plans a brief respite from the weight she sometimes felt in Westlake. It was during this call that Jasmine first noticed the police cruiser. Moving unusually slow along the park perimeter, it seemed to be following her path. Jasmine observed other joggers, all white, passing by without a second glance from the officer. But the cruiser maintained its pace alongside her route, like a predator tracking its prey. When she ended her call with Marcus, the cruiser's lights flashed once, signaling for her to stop. Officer Richard Davenport, a 46-year-old white man with 20 years on the force, stepped out with his hand resting casually on his holster. "Good morning, ma'am. We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his tone implying she was the suspicious activity in question. Jasmine remained calm, having experienced similar stops before. She knew the drill. "I'm just out for my morning run, officer. I live on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from here." She reached slowly for her ID, maintaining eye contact as she'd learned to do in these situations. "May I ask what kind of suspicious activity was reported?" Davenport's expression hardened at her question. "I'll ask the questions here," he said, examining her ID with exaggerated scrutiny. "What are you doing in this neighborhood so early?" The question itself revealed his assumptions. Despite her address clearly visible on her license, he couldn't reconcile her presence in this wealthy area. Jasmine took a deep breath. "As I mentioned, I'm jogging. I do this every morning before work. I'm the senior administrator at Westlake Memorial Hospital." Davenport handed back her ID with visible reluctance. From the back of his cruiser came the sound of aggressive barking. A Belgian Malinois named Stryker paced behind the gated partition, clearly agitated by something or someone. Jasmine noticed Davenport's hand move to his radio. "I'm going to need you to stay right where you are. I'm calling for backup." This was escalating for no reason, and Jasmine felt the familiar internal conflict stand her ground and assert her rights or submit to avoid potential violence. She was aware of her legal concealed carry firearm in her running belt, a precaution she'd started taking after receiving threatening letters when she first moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago. She had all the proper permits, had taken extensive training courses, and hoped she would never need to use it. Looking around the park, Jasmine noticed how isolated this section was at this early hour. Few witnesses, no security cameras, just the word of a black woman against a white police officer if things went wrong. The history of her neighborhood flashed through her mind, the numerous calls about suspicious black people reported by concerned residents that always seemed to result in humiliating encounters with law enforcement. Officer Jasmine said carefully, "I've identified myself, and I'm clearly just out for a jog. Is there a specific reason you need backup for a conversation with a resident exercising in a public park?" Officer Tyler Briggs arrived within minutes, his cruiser screeching to a halt beside Davenport's. At 31, Briggs was new to the force and eager to impress the veterans, especially someone like Davenport, who had a reputation among certain officers for keeping the peace in Westlake. Briggs exited his vehicle with his hand already positioned on his weapon, approaching Jasmine as if she were an armed suspect rather than a woman in running clothes. "Everything okay here, Rich?" he asked Davenport, completely ignoring Jasmine's presence. Davenport nodded toward Jasmine with a subtle smirk. "Just checking out a suspicious individual. Says she lives around here, but something doesn't feel right." The emphasis on suspicious wasn't lost on Jasmine, who had remained perfectly still, knowing that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted or worse, deliberately misconstrued. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, Jasmine slowly reached for her phone. "I'm going to record this interaction, officers," she stated calmly, knowing it was her legal right. Davenport immediately tensed. "Put that down, I don't know what you're reaching for. Could be a weapon." His hand moved to his holster again. "I said I'm reaching for my phone to record this conversation, which is my legal right," Jasmine replied, her voice steady, despite her racing heart. "I'm going to move very slowly." Davenport stepped closer. "I said put it away, now." His tone left no room for discussion. Through the radio on Davenport's shoulder, Jasmine could hear the dispatcher's voice. "Unit 47, be advised. No reports of suspicious activity have been called in from the Oakwood area this morning." Davenport quickly adjusted his radio volume, but Jasmine had heard it clearly. There had been no reports, no reason for this stop beyond the color of her skin. From the cruiser K9, Stryker's barking intensified, almost as if sensing his handler's growing frustration. Davenport glanced back at the dog with what Jasmine could only describe as anticipation. As this tense standoff continued, other joggers passed by, all white, all slowing down to observe but none stopping to intervene. One woman, however, a blonde in her 40s whom Jasmine recognized from the neighborhood association meetings, slowed her pace considerably. Sarah Colson, who lived just a few houses down from Jasmine, appeared concerned about what she was witnessing. "Everything okay here?" Sarah called out, her morning run interrupted by the scene before her. Davenport waved her away dismissively. "Official police business, ma'am. Everything's under control. Please move along." Jasmine saw an opportunity for a witness. "Sarah, it's me, Jasmine from Maple Street. Could you stay for a moment?" she called out, hoping the presence of another resident might force the officers to act more professionally. Davenport stepped between them. "Ma'am, I asked you to move along. This doesn't concern you." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn between helping her neighbor and avoiding conflict with the police. Meanwhile, Davenport pressed his radio button. "Sergeant, we've got a potentially hostile subject at Oakwood Park, refusing to comply with simple commands." Backup already on scene. Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had complied with everything they'd asked, provided identification, and remained calm, despite the escalating situation. The deliberate mischaracterization of her behavior sent a chill down her spine, reminding her of stories she'd heard too many times, stories that often ended tragically for people who looked like her. "That's not true," she said firmly. "I have not been hostile or non-compliant in any way. I provided my ID when asked and answered all your questions truthfully." Briggs stepped closer, his hand still on his weapon. "If you're not being hostile, then why are you arguing with officers?" His question was designed to create a no-win situation where any defense of herself could be interpreted as aggression. Jasmine had experienced racial profiling before, had been followed in stores, had taxi drivers refused to pick her up, had been asked if she was in the right neighborhood when walking to her own home. But this felt different, more dangerous. Davenport kept touching his taser and glancing back at the K9 unit as if itching for an excuse to use either or both. Each time Jasmine tried to de-escalate, explaining calmly that she was simply exercising in a public park near her home, the officers seemed to grow more agitated rather than less, as if her articulate responses and knowledge of her rights were themselves acts of defiance. "She's making threatening movements," Davenport suddenly announced, though Jasmine had remained almost stationary throughout the entire encounter. Before she could protest this blatant lie, Davenport was already moving toward his cruiser. With practiced efficiency, he swung open the rear door. "Stryker, detain," he commanded, without the warning that department policy required before deploying a K-9 unit. The Belgian Malinois launched from the vehicle like a missile, covering the distance to Jasmine in seconds. Instinctively, Jasmine backed away, raising her arms to protect herself, but the dog was trained for this. Stryker's powerful jaws clamped around her forearm teeth, sinking through the thin material of her running jacket and into her flesh. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, like dozens of knives plunging simultaneously into her arm. Jasmine screamed, the sound primal and agonized. The dog's training had taught it to hold and shake, causing maximum damage to the target. Blood immediately began soaking through her sleeve, dripping onto the park's walking path. "Call him off," Sarah screamed from where she stood, now pulling out her own phone to record what was happening. "What are you doing?" She wasn't threatening anyone. Neither Davenport nor Briggs made any move to recall the dog. Instead, Davenport watched with what could only be described as satisfaction, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as Jasmine fell to her knees, the dog still attached to her arm. Briggs stood back, looking uncomfortable but making no move to intervene. As Jasmine fell to the ground, images flashed through her mind of other Black Americans who had encountered police and never made it home. Philando Castile, just miles from where she now knelt. Sandra Bland. George Floyd. Breonna Taylor. So many names, so many lives ended during what should have been routine interactions. With horrifying clarity, she realized that Davenport had no intention of calling off the dog anytime soon. The animal was now trying to drag her by the arm, its powerful neck muscles pulling as Jasmine desperately tried to stay upright to prevent further injury. Blood loss and pain were making her dizzy, her vision starting to blur at the edges. In that moment of perfect clarity that sometimes comes in life-or-death situations, Jasmine made a decision. With her free hand, she reached slowly toward her running belt, where her legally carried firearm was holstered. The movement caught Davenport's attention. His smile vanished, replaced by something else, something darker. "Stryker, take her down," he shouted, issuing a second attack command to the already engaged dog. The animal immediately released her arm and lunged for a more devastating target, her throat. Jasmine had milliseconds to react. Her hand closed around her weapon, drawing it as the dog launched toward her neck. The sound of the gunshot seemed impossibly loud in the morning quiet of Oakwood Park. Stryker yelped as the bullet struck his shoulder, not a killing shot, but enough to halt his attack. The dog stumbled, wounded but alive, whimpering as it retreated. Chaos erupted immediately. Davenport and Briggs both drew their weapons, training them on Jasmine, who now lay bleeding on the ground, her gun dropped and hands raised in surrender. "Gun! She's got a gun!" Davenport shouted, though the weapon was now visibly on the ground beside her. From somewhere nearby, Sarah's voice. "I'm recording all of this. She was defending herself from the dog that you set on her for no reason." Briggs rushed forward, kicking Jasmine's weapon away, while Davenport kept his gun aimed directly at her head. Lying there, blood pooling beneath her, Jasmine thought of her family, of Marcus waiting for her at the reunion, of her parents who had warned her about moving to this neighborhood, of all the things she had yet to do in life. She genuinely believed in that moment that she was about to die, that Davenport would claim she had threatened him, and that would be the end of her story. Do you think Jasmine was justified in defending herself? Comment number 1 if you believe her actions were reasonable self-defense, or number 2 if you think she should have handled the situation differently. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that need to be told. The question remains, what happens when those sworn to protect become the threat? Will Jasmine survive this encounter, and if she does, will justice ever be served? Let's continue to find out what happened after this shocking confrontation. Despite her severe injuries, Jasmine was handcuffed roughly behind her back, the metal cutting into her wrists as blood continued to flow freely from the multiple puncture wounds on her arm. Neither Davenport nor Briggs made any move to provide first aid or call for medical assistance. The injured K-9, meanwhile, was being tended to with more care than the human victim, Davenport, kneeling beside his partner, with genuine concern. "You shot my dog," he said to Jasmine, his voice cold with fury. "That's assaulting an officer and animal cruelty. You're going away for a long time." Sarah had moved closer, her phone still recording everything. "She needs an ambulance. Look at how much blood she's losing," she shouted her. Earlier hesitation replaced by righteous anger. "You set that dog on her for absolutely no reason, and I have it all on video." Davenport turned toward Sarah, his expression darkening. "Ma'am, I need to confiscate that phone as evidence," he said, reaching toward her. Sarah stepped back, clutching her phone tightly. "No way. I know my rights. This is my property, and I'm not legally required to give it to you without a warrant." The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of additional police vehicles, their sirens cutting through the morning air. Among the officers emerging from the cars was Lieutenant James Wilson, a 50-year-old black man who had served on the force for over 25 years. His expression grew troubled as he took in the scene before him. A black woman handcuffed and bleeding on the ground, 2 officers with drawn weapons, a civilian recording, and an injured police dog. "What the hell happened here?" Wilson demanded, quickly approaching Jasmine and seeing the severity of her injuries. "Why hasn't an ambulance been called?" "Get medical here now," he ordered one of the newly arrived officers, who immediately radioed for emergency medical services. Davenport stepped forward, already crafting his narrative. "Lieutenant, this woman was acting suspiciously in the park. When we approached to question her, she became aggressive and threatened officers. I deployed Stryker to subdue her, and she pulled a concealed weapon and shot him. We were about to call for medical after securing the scene." Sarah immediately contradicted him. "That's a lie. I saw the whole thing. She was just jogging, showed them her ID, and was completely cooperative. They set the dog on her without warning, and for no reason. She only used her gun when the dog was going for her throat after already mauling her arm." She held up her phone. "I have it all on video." Lieutenant Wilson found himself in an impossible position. As a black officer in a predominantly white department, he had spent years walking a tightrope trying to uphold his oath while navigating the unspoken racial dynamics within the force. Now he was faced with a situation that demanded he choose sides, support his fellow officers, or stand up for what appeared to be a grave injustice. The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics rushing to Jasmine's side. "These cuffs need to come off so we can treat her properly," one of them insisted. After a moment's hesitation, Wilson nodded, though he compromised by ordering a junior officer to remain with her. "She's still under arrest, but medical needs come first." As Jasmine was loaded into the ambulance, still technically in custody, and now charged with assaulting an officer and animal cruelty, she caught a glimpse of Sarah talking intently with Lieutenant Wilson, showing him something on her phone. The doors closed, and Jasmine was left alone with her police escort and the paramedics working to stabilize her. At Westlake Memorial Hospital, the very institution where Jasmine held a senior position, she was treated like a criminal rather than a respected administrator. The emergency room doctors recognized her immediately, but were clearly uncomfortable with the police presence and the circumstances. "These dog bites are severe," Dr. Patel informed the officer guarding Jasmine's room. "She's lost a significant amount of blood, and there's potential nerve damage. She needs surgery and will require admission." Despite her professional connections, Jasmine was prevented from contacting her family, her phone confiscated as evidence. Outside her room, a uniformed officer stood guard as if she might somehow flee despite her injuries and the hospital security. Meanwhile, local news stations had already begun reporting on the incident with the headline, "Armed Black Woman Attacks Police, K9, During Arrest." The initial reports relied heavily on the police department's press statement, which painted Jasmine as the aggressor who had inexplicably attacked officers performing their duties. On the hospital's security cameras, a different story was unfolding in the waiting area. Davenport and Briggs had arrived to check on Stryker, who was being treated in the veterinary wing of the hospital. The cameras captured their hushed conversation in a corner of the waiting room. "We need to get our stories straight," Davenport muttered to his younger colleague. "She reached for something. We thought it was a weapon. I deployed Stryker for officer safety." "Stick to that, nothing else." Briggs looked uncomfortable but nodded his agreement. Just as the doctors were preparing to take Jasmine to surgery, Marcus arrived at the hospital, having been notified by a sympathetic nurse who recognized Jasmine. He was immediately blocked from seeing his sister. "She's in police custody," the officer explained without further elaboration. "No visitors allowed." Marcus, a corporate attorney himself, immediately pulled out his phone and called Benjamin Reynolds, a family friend and experienced civil rights lawyer. "Ben, it's Marcus Washington. My sister Jasmine has been attacked by a police dog and is now under arrest at Westlake Memorial. They won't let me see her, and I'm hearing they're trying to charge her with assaulting an officer. I need your help right now." As Marcus waited anxiously in the lobby, the hospital's television displayed the police department's press conference. Chief Thomas Whitaker, a white man in his early 60s with political aspirations for his upcoming retirement, stood at the podium with a grave expression. "Today, one of our brave K-9 officers was seriously injured in the line of duty when a suspect violently resisted arrest. We are investigating the full circumstances, but I want to assure the public that our officers acted according to protocol when faced with a threatening individual. We ask for your thoughts and prayers for our injured K-9 officer." No mention was made of Jasmine's injuries or the circumstances that led to the confrontation. On social media, the story was spreading rapidly with sharply divided reactions. Those who had only seen the police statement condemned Jasmine as yet another criminal, attacking our heroes in blue, while others who had glimpsed parts of Sarah's video, which had begun circulating despite police efforts to suppress it, questioned the official narrative and called for a full investigation. Back at the precinct, Lieutenant Wilson sat alone in his office reviewing the footage from Davenport's body camera. What he saw troubled him deeply. The video showed a cooperative woman being harassed without cause, escalating to a vicious attack that seemed motivated by nothing more than Davenport's apparent disdain for a black woman in an affluent neighborhood. Wilson closed the file and sat back in his chair, knowing that what he did next would define not just Jasmine's fate, but his own career and conscience as well. Benjamin Reynolds arrived at the hospital just as Jasmine was being wheeled out of surgery, his 58 years of experience as a civil rights attorney, evident in the authoritative way he navigated the hospital corridors. "I need to see my client immediately," he informed the officers stationed outside the recovery room. When the officer began to object, Reynolds cut him off sharply. "She has the right to counsel, and I am her attorney. Unless you want to add violation of constitutional rights to what will already be a substantial lawsuit, I suggest you step aside." Reluctantly, the officer complied. Inside, Reynolds found Jasmine groggy from anesthesia, but alert enough to recognize him. "Ben," she whispered, relief evident in her voice. "They were trying to get a statement from me earlier. I didn't say anything." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "Good. Don't say a word to anyone without me present." He pulled out a notepad. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning." As Jasmine recounted the morning's events, Reynolds took detailed notes, his expression growing progressively grimmer. When she finished, he showed her the preliminary police report he had managed to obtain through his connections. "This is what they're claiming happened," he said, allowing her to read Davenport's version of events, which portrayed her as belligerent, uncooperative, and ultimately violent toward officers performing their lawful duty. "This is completely fabricated," Jasmine said, her voice stronger now despite her pain. "None of this happened the way he's describing." Reynolds nodded. "I know, and fortunately we have a witness. Sarah Colson contacted my office an hour ago, with video evidence that contradicts their entire narrative." He pulled out his tablet and showed Jasmine a clip from Sarah's recording, which clearly showed Davenport releasing the K-9 without warning, while Jasmine stood still, followed by her desperate act of self-defense when the dog went for her throat. "This changes everything," Reynolds said, his confidence growing. "With this evidence, I'm filing an emergency motion to dismiss all charges against you." Dr. Patel entered the room with Jasmine's medical report. "The damage is extensive," he explained, showing Reynolds the detailed assessment. "Multiple deep tissue lacerations, muscle damage, and potential permanent nerve damage to the right arm. She'll need physical therapy, and even then there may be lasting impairment." Reynolds documented everything, building his case methodically. That same afternoon, Reynolds found himself facing District Attorney Catherine Simmons, a politically ambitious white woman known for her tough-on-crime stance and close relationships with the police department. "The evidence doesn't support these charges," Catherine Reynolds argued in her office. "I have video showing the entire incident. Your officers attacked my client without provocation and with excessive force. She acted in legitimate self-defense." Simmons remained unmoved. "Your client shot a police K-9 Ben. That's a felony regardless of the circumstances. The department has provided evidence that she was uncooperative and posed a threat to officers." Reynolds leaned forward. "Evidence that's contradicted by video footage and eyewitness testimony. Drop the charges now, or we go public with everything, and I mean everything, including Officer Davenport's history of complaints." Something flickered in Simmons' eyes, but she maintained her composure. "The charges stand, Counselor. We'll see you in court." As Reynolds had predicted, the media narrative began shifting dramatically once clips from Sarah's video leaked online. Local news stations that had initially reported the police version verbatim now ran headlines questioning the officer's actions. "Disturbing video raises questions about Police K-9 attack on local hospital administrator," replaced the earlier armed woman attacks police dog narrative. The police department, suddenly on the defensive, announced an internal affairs investigation, and Officer Davenport was placed on administrative leave, with pay the standard procedure that many critics called a paid vacation for officers accused of misconduct. The police union wasted no time in mobilizing support for Davenport. Jeffrey Parker, the union representative, held a press conference on the steps of the precinct. "Officer Davenport is a decorated 20-year veteran who has served this community with distinction. We stand firmly behind him and Officer Briggs in this difficult time." The partial video being circulated online doesn't show the full context of the threatening situation these officers faced. Behind the scenes, Police Chief Thomas Whitaker, who had built his career on maintaining good relationships with both the wealthy residents of Westlake and the powerful police union, called an emergency meeting with D.A. Simmons. "This needs to go away, Catherine," he said bluntly, in the privacy of his office. "Davenport may have overstepped, but we can't afford a racially charged excessive force case right now. The department's reputation is at stake." Simmons understood the implications. "The video is problematic, Tom. If this goes to trial, it won't look good for any of us." Whitaker leaned forward. "Then, make sure it doesn't go to trial. Your office has discretion. Use it. Remember who supported your last campaign." The threat was thinly veiled but clear. Reynolds, meanwhile, was building public support for Jasmine. His press conference outside the hospital drew national media attention. "Jasmine Washington is a respected medical professional who was brutally attacked while exercising in her own neighborhood," he told the assembled reporters. "Her only crime was jogging while black in an affluent area. She acted in self-defense when a trained attack dog was set upon her without warning and without justification. We call on the district attorney to immediately drop all charges and for the Department of Justice to investigate this as a civil rights violation." Community organizations quickly rallied around Jasmine's cause. Protesters gathered outside the police department carrying signs, reading "Justice for Jasmine" and "Jogging while black is not a crime." The demonstration remained peaceful but grew in numbers each day as more details of the case became public. After 3 days in the hospital, Jasmine was released but placed under house arrest with an ankle monitor, a condition Reynolds vigorously opposed but failed to prevent. Her first court appearance was scheduled for the following week, a preliminary hearing where Reynolds expected his motion to dismiss would be considered. The night before the hearing, Jasmine sat in her living room, her injured arm throbbing despite the medication. The physical pain, however, paled in comparison to the psychological trauma. She jumped at every sound, had nightmares about dogs attacking her, and couldn't bring herself to look out the windows facing the street. The symptoms of PTSD were setting in, a common but often overlooked consequence for victims of police violence. When Reynolds arrived at her home to prepare for the hearing, he found her exhausted and anxious, but determined to fight. "I won't let them paint me as a criminal," she told him firmly. "I've worked too hard to build my life here. The preliminary hearing the next morning was brief but disappointing. Judge Michael Townsend, known for his pro-law enforcement leanings, denied Reynolds' motion to dismiss despite the video evidence. The prosecution has presented sufficient probable cause to proceed with the charges, he ruled. The full context and circumstances will be determined at trial. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Colson faced her own challenges. Neighbors, who had once been friendly now, avoided her, and she'd received anonymous calls suggesting she was a race traitor for supporting Jasmine. Her interior design business had lost several clients who didn't want to be associated with someone causing trouble for the police. Despite this, she stood firmly beside Jasmine after the hearing. "I'm not backing down," she told reporters. "What I saw was wrong, and I won't be silent about it, no matter the personal cost." As Reynolds and Jasmine left the courthouse that day, the attorney's expression was grim but determined. "Round one didn't go our way," he admitted. "But this is just the beginning. The truth is on our side, and eventually the law will be too." The protest movement surrounding Jasmine's case grew exponentially in the weeks following her first court appearance, with local activist Jordan Maxwell emerging as a key organizer. "This isn't just about one woman or one incident," Maxwell declared to a crowd of over 500 gathered in Westlake's Central Plaza. "This is about a system that criminalizes black existence in white spaces. Jasmine Washington could have been any one of us." Across town, a smaller but vocal counter-protest had formed, with off-duty officers and their supporters carrying Blue Lives Matter flags and signs supporting Davenport. "Our officers put their lives on the line every day," one speaker shouted through a megaphone. "They deserve our support, not our criticism when they make split-second decisions in dangerous situations." The division extended beyond public demonstrations. At Westlake Memorial Hospital, where Jasmine had worked for 7 years with an impeccable record, administration found themselves caught in the crossfire. While the CEO and her immediate colleagues stood firmly behind her, several board members had expressed concerns about the controversy affecting the hospital's reputation. "We've received calls from major donors threatening to withdraw their support if we continue to employ someone involved in shooting a police dog," one board member reported during an emergency session. "We need to consider the financial implications." The CEO, Dr. Lawrence Chen, had forcefully rejected the suggestion. Jasmine Washington is an exemplary administrator who was victimized twice, first by police brutality and then by a miscarriage of justice. This hospital will not abandon her based on donor pressure or false narratives. Meanwhile, Marcus had mobilized their extended family and community connections, creating a support network for his sister as she recovered both physically and emotionally from the attack. Daily phone calls, meal deliveries, and visits from friends helped Jasmine maintain her spirits despite the ankle monitor that confined her to her home and the constant pain from her injuries. Sarah's complete video had gone viral, nationally picked up by major news networks, and shared millions of times on social media platforms. The unedited footage, showing Davenport's unprovoked K-9 attack on a cooperative black woman, contradicted the police narrative so dramatically that civil rights organizations across the country had reached out to offer support and resources. "We're monitoring this case closely," the national director of a prominent civil rights legal defense fund told reporters. "The video evidence is disturbing and suggests a clear violation of Ms. Washington's constitutional rights." Lieutenant Wilson, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated within the department. Other officers viewed his refusal to automatically back Davenport with suspicion, creating an uncomfortable working environment. Despite the pressure, Wilson had begun quietly investigating Davenport's record, discovering a troubling pattern of complaints from minority residents that had been systematically dismissed or settled with non-disclosure agreements. In one case, from 3 years earlier, a Hispanic teenager had required 50 stitches after Stryker was deployed during a minor trespassing incident. The case had been settled out of court for $75,000 with a confidentiality clause. Using Freedom of Information Act requests, Reynolds had obtained documentation of 17 excessive force complaints against Davenport over his 20-year career, 14 of which involved minority subjects. None had resulted in disciplinary action, creating a pattern that Reynolds believed demonstrated departmental negligence and implicit bias. The evidence was mounting, but institutional resistance remained strong. Local news stations conducted an exclusive interview with Carlos Mendez, the Hispanic teenager from the previous K-9 incident, who had broken his confidentiality agreement to speak out. "When I saw what happened to Miss Washington, I couldn't stay silent anymore," Mendez explained. "The same thing happened to me. The same officer, the same dog, the same excuses. The only difference is that she had a witness recording it." Chief Whitaker called another press conference visibly defensive as he faced increasingly skeptical reporters. "The Westlake Police Department has rigorous training and clear protocols regarding the use of force, including K-9 deployments," he insisted. "We are conducting a thorough internal investigation into this incident, but I want to emphasize that our officers face difficult and dangerous situations daily, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt until all facts are known." Social media campaigns supporting Jasmine had gained celebrity endorsements and national attention, while counter-campaigns defending the police department showcased Stryker in his bandages portraying the K-9 as the true victim. The polarization reflected deeper divides in American society regarding race policing and justice. D.A. Simmons, feeling the mounting public pressure but still beholden to her political allies in law enforcement, convened a grand jury to consider the charges against Jasmine, a process that would take place behind closed doors and allow her to distance herself from the decision on whether to proceed to trial. An anonymous source within the police department leaked information to investigative journalist Maya Rodriguez about Davenport's history, including department emails discussing previous incidents that had been concealed from the EPEPI public. Rodriguez's explosive report detailed not just Davenport's pattern of targeting minorities, but also the systemic cover-up that had enabled his behavior to continue unchecked for years. From her home, still confined by the ankle monitor and ongoing legal battle, Jasmine made her first public statement via video conference. Seated in her living room, her injured arm still in a sling, she spoke with a dignity and composure that belied her circumstances. "I have served this community as a healthcare administrator for 7 years," she began. "I have lived in Westlake for 3 years, paying the same taxes, following the same laws, and deserving the same protection as any other resident. Instead, while exercising in a public park near my home, I was profiled, harassed, and ultimately attacked with potentially deadly force for no reason other than the color of my skin." Her powerful testimony about racial injustice in policing resonated across the country, the video shared millions of times within hours of its release. As public scrutiny intensified, another damaging revelation emerged. Davenport's body camera had mysteriously malfunctioned during the incident with Jasmine, a convenient technical failure that had become a pattern in his controversial encounters. Do you believe police departments should implement stricter accountability measures for officers with multiple complaints? Comment number 1. If you think officers like Davenport should be removed from duty after a pattern of concerning mesons behavior. Or number 2, if you believe officers deserve strong protections against complaints that might be unfair. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more coverage of stories that matter. How far does this corruption extend? And will the truth be enough to overcome a system designed to protect its own? Will Jasmine ever receive justice for what happened to her that morning in Oakwood Park? Let's continue her story. And .com Sumsactive I2Z. Find out. Reynolds had hired a digital forensics expert who made a breakthrough discovery: Davenport's body camera hadn't malfunctioned at all. It had been manually deactivated just before the encounter with Jasmine. Further investigation of the department's digital records revealed that the original footage before the claimed malfunction had been deleted from the main server but remained in the system's automatic cloud backup, which officers couldn't access but the expert could recover. What this recovered footage showed was damning. Davenport and Briggs in their patrol car just minutes before stopping Jasmine, explicitly discussing targeting her. "Got another one who doesn't belong," Davenport could be heard saying as they first spotted Jasmine jogging. "Let's see what she's really doing here." Briggs had laughed nervously. "You think she's up to something?" Davenport's response was chilling in its casualness. "They're always up to something in neighborhoods like this. Maybe Stryker needs some exercise this morning." The deliberate nature of the harassment, captured in the officer's own words and by their own equipment, transformed the case from a possible misunderstanding into a clear civil rights violation. Reynolds immediately took the recovered footage to Lieutenant Wilson, who had been building his own case within Internal Affairs. Wilson, despite knowing the professional risk, brought the evidence directly to the Internal Affairs Director. "This isn't just excessive force," he argued. "This is premeditated targeting of a citizen based on race. It violates everything we're supposed to stand for." The director, uncomfortable with the implications but unable to ignore such clear evidence, agreed to expand the investigation. Meanwhile, Officer Briggs, the younger and less experienced partner, began to feel the weight of his participation in the incident and subsequent cover-up. With his career just beginning and potentially facing federal charges for civil rights violations, he reached out through his personal attorney to the district attorney's office. "My client is willing to provide complete testimony about the incident and department practices in exchange for immunity," his lawyer proposed during a confidential meeting with one of Simmons' assistant DAs. "He has information not just about the Washington case, but about a pattern of similar incidents." The potential deal sent shockwaves through the department. Chief Whitaker, upon learning of Briggs's approach to the DA, called an emergency meeting with his command staff. "This needs to be contained," he insisted. "Internal Affairs needs to conclude their investigation with administrative punishments only. We handle this in-house." But the situation had already grown beyond his control. An anonymous whistleblower, later revealed to be a clerk in the records department, had sent documentation of the cover-up attempts to the regional office of the FBI, triggering a preliminary investigation by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division into potential federal violations. For Jasmine, the weeks of legal battles and public scrutiny had taken their toll. The infection from the dog bites had returned, requiring another surgery and intravenous antibiotics. The tissue damage was more extensive than we initially believed, Dr. Patel explained to Reynolds during a hospital visit. And emotional stress can compromise the immune system, making infections more likely and more severe. Despite her deteriorating health, Jasmine remained resolute. When Reynolds informed her of the recovered footage and Briggs's potential testimony, she managed a smile through her pain. "So they'll finally have to admit what really happened," she said. "What about the charges against me?" Reynolds' expression was cautiously optimistic. "With this new evidence, I've filed another motion to dismiss. The DA's office will have a hard time justifying prosecution now, especially with federal authorities involved." True to his word, Reynolds filed a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against the police department, Chief Whitaker, and Officers Davenport and Briggs, personally citing excessive force, racial discrimination, false arrest, malicious prosecution, and civil rights violations. The lawsuit detailed not just Jasmine's physical injuries, but the psychological trauma and professional damage she had suffered. As the case gained national attention, darker elements emerged. Jasmine began receiving anonymous death threats at her home. "Race traitor cop killers, get what they deserve," read one particularly disturbing note that had been left in her mailbox overnight, despite the security system Marcus had installed. Each threat was documented and reported, adding to the mounting evidence of the racial animus surrounding the case. The investigation into Davenport's history revealed even more troubling patterns. His personnel file, obtained through legal discovery, showed that throughout his career, his K-9 partner had been deployed almost exclusively against minority suspects, a statistical anomaly that could not be explained by random chance. Internal department emails, now part of the legal record, revealed jokes and derogatory comments about minority residents in Westlake, with Davenport often at the center of these exchanges. Several other officers had participated, creating a documented culture of racial bias within certain elements of the department. Sarah Colson, whose video evidence had been crucial to exposing the truth, found herself increasingly isolated in Westlake. Clients had canceled contracts with her interior design business, citing her involvement in controversial politics, and former friends avoided her at community events. "I've lost about 70% of my business," she told Reynolds during a preparation session for her potential testimony. "But I'd do it again. What I saw that morning was wrong, and staying silent wasn't an option." The community polarization intensified. A town hall meeting organized by the mayor to address concerns about policing descended into shouting matches between those demanding accountability and others defending the department. The racial divide was stark and uncomfortable, bringing long-simmering tensions in the seemingly idyllic suburb to the surface. As the grand jury neared its decision on whether to indict Jasmine, D.A. Simmons found herself in an increasingly untenable position. The political calculation had changed dramatically with the new evidence and federal involvement. Pursuing charges against Jasmine now carried significant professional risk, but dropping them would anger her police department allies. Reynolds had one final card to play. Through financial records obtained during discovery, he had uncovered suspicious connections between Chief Whitaker and the police union's Political Action Committee. Funds had been diverted through a complex arrangement that potentially violated campaign finance laws, with Whitaker receiving benefits not reported on his financial disclosures. "We're prepared to include this information in an expanded federal complaint if necessary," Reynolds informed Simmons during a private meeting. "But we'd prefer to focus on justice for Jasmine, rather than broader departmental corruption." Faced with mounting evidence, political risk, and potential federal charges against police leadership, Simmons finally relented. "The grand jury will receive all evidence, including the recovered footage and Officer Briggs' testimony," she promised. "I will make no recommendation either way." It was as close to a concession as Reynolds expected from the politically ambitious DA. In her hospital room, recovering from her second surgery, Jasmine watched the news coverage of her case with mixed emotions. The truth was finally emerging, but at enormous personal cost. Her arm would never fully recover its strength, her career had been interrupted, her sense of safety shattered, and her faith in the justice system severely tested. Yet there was also a growing sense that her suffering might lead to meaningful change, that the system that had failed her so dramatically might be forced to confront its flaws and biases. "Whatever happens next," she told Marcus, as they watched the latest news report together, "they can't pretend this didn't happen. They can't bury it or explain it away." The grand jury's decision was expected within days, and with it the next chapter in Jasmine's fight for justice would begin. The grand jury's decision sent shockwaves through Westlake and beyond. They had declined to indict Jasmine on any charges, and instead recommended that the district attorney file charges against Officer Davenport for assault battery, official misconduct, and civil rights violations. The unprecedented reversal caught both the police department and D.A. Simmons off guard. Legally obligated to respect the grand jury's findings, but politically reluctant to prosecute a police officer, Simmons held a terse press conference. "My office will pursue these charges with the same diligence we bring to all cases," she stated without enthusiasm. Officer Davenport, like any defendant, is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Within hours, Davenport had hired Gregory Lancaster, a high-profile defense attorney, known for representing police officers accused of misconduct. Lancaster's retainer, reportedly in the six figures, raised questions about how a public servant on a police salary could afford such representation, questions that were answered when the police union publicly announced they would cover all legal expenses. "We stand behind our officers 100%, the union statement declared. Meanwhile, Reynolds was coordinating with federal prosecutors from the Department of Justice, who had officially opened a civil rights investigation and filed additional charges against Davenport under federal statutes. "This two-pronged approach gives us the best chance for justice," Reynolds explained to Jasmine and her family. "If the state prosecution fails for any reason, the federal case continues independently." For Jasmine, the prospect of testifying at trial brought a mixture of vindication and dread. Her recovery was progressing slowly with physical therapy 3 times weekly for her damaged arm, but the psychological wounds remained raw. "I'll have to relive everything in that courtroom," she told her therapist during a session, "and face him again sitting there watching me." Despite her fears, Jasmine was determined to testify, understanding that her first-person account would be crucial to securing a conviction. Davenport's defense strategy quickly became clear: attack Jasmine's character and portray her as anti-police. Lancaster subpoenaed her entire social media history, seeking any posts that could be construed as critical of law enforcement. He also brought forward residents who claimed they had seen Jasmine acting suspiciously in the neighborhood before vague allegations without specific incidents that nonetheless served to plant seeds of doubt. Lancaster filed numerous motions, including one to exclude Sarah's video on technical grounds, claiming chain of custody issues and potential editing. Judge Harriet Washington, a 60-year-old black woman with a reputation for strict adherence to legal procedure and little patience for courtroom theatrics, presided over the case. Her background as a former civil rights attorney before joining the bench made her particularly attentive to the constitutional issues at stake. The video evidence was legally obtained by a civilian witness, exercising her First Amendment rights. Judge Washington ruled denying Lancaster's motion. The defense has presented no credible evidence of tampering or editing. The jury will see the complete footage. The trial began 3 months after the incident, with media attention reaching fever pitch. National news networks set up temporary studios near the courthouse, and protesters from both sides lined the street each morning. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution's opening statement laid out a damning narrative of abuse of power and racial targeting. "This case is not about policing," the lead prosecutor declared. "It's about a man who used his badge and his trained K-9 partner as weapons against a citizen he targeted solely because of her race. It's about an abuse of power so flagrant that it nearly cost Jasmine Washington her life." Lancaster's opening countered with a portrayal of Davenport as a dedicated 20-year veteran making split-second decisions in a potentially dangerous situation. He suggested that the recovered body cam footage had been taken out of context and that Jasmine's concealed weapon justified the officer's concerns. Officer Davenport did exactly what his training and experience dictated, Lancaster insisted. He protected himself and his partner from an armed individual in a public park. Over the following 2 weeks, the prosecution methodically built their case. Medical experts testified about the severity of Jasmine's injuries, with Dr. Patel explaining that the multiple surgeries and ongoing physical therapy might never restore full function to her arm. The nerve damage from the K-9 bite was extensive, he testified, showing the jury graphic photos of Jasmine's wounds. This type of injury is consistent with an attack, not a controlled police K-9 hold. Police procedure experts confirmed that Davenport's actions violated multiple departmental protocols. K-9 units are never to be deployed without clear warning, except in extreme circumstances involving imminent threat to officer safety, testified former K-9 trainer Sergeant Michael Rodriguez. Based on the video evidence and witness statements, there was no justification for deploying the K-9 without warning in this situation. Officer Briggs, testifying under his immunity agreement, provided perhaps the most damaging evidence. Visibly nervous but resolute, he described the culture within certain segments of the department and Davenport's specific intentions that morning. He said he wanted to, quote, "show her she doesn't belong here," Briggs testified. "There was never any suspicious activity reported that morning. We targeted Miss Washington because she was black in a white neighborhood, plain and simple." Lieutenant Wilson followed, risking his 25-year career to testify about the pattern of complaints against Davenport and the department's failure to address them. There were 17 formal complaints involving excessive force against minorities, Wilson stated. Each was either dismissed without proper investigation or settled with confidentiality agreements. The department had ample notice of this officer's conduct and chose to ignore it. The prosecution introduced evidence of tampered records and destroyed evidence showing how department leadership had attempted to cover up not just this incident, but previous complaints as well. Internal emails revealed a casual racism that permeated certain circles within the force, with jokes and derogatory terms about minority residents regularly exchanged. When it was Jasmine's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. Walking to the witness stand with a slight limp, her right arm still not fully functional, she presented a powerful image of both injury and dignity. For nearly 6 hours over 2 days, she recounted every detail of that morning, from the moment she noticed the police cruiser following her to the terrifying attack and her desperate act of self-defense. Lancaster's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to portray her legal firearm as threatening and suggesting she had somehow provoked the incident. "You knew carrying a weapon while jogging in an affluent neighborhood might cause concern, didn't you?" he pressed. Jasmine remained composed. "I had all proper permits for my firearm, which was concealed in my running belt. No one knew I was carrying until I was forced to defend myself from a dog that was trying to kill me after being set upon me without warning or justification." When Davenport took the stand in his own defense, he maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. "I perceived a threat to officer safety," he insisted repeatedly, even when confronted with the recovered body cam footage of his comments before the encounter. Statements made in the patrol car were just casual conversation, not indicative of any intent. His demeanor, alternating between righteous indignation and attempts at professional detachment, did little to counter the mountain of evidence against him. After 3 weeks of testimony, the closing arguments presented two starkly different narratives. The prosecution painted a picture of systematic abuse of power, racial targeting, and attempted cover-up. Lancaster, in his final appeal to the jury, warned of the chilling effect a conviction would have on police officers making difficult decisions in the field. "If we criminalize split-second judgments made under pressure, no one will want to wear the badge," he argued, "and all of our communities will be less safe as a result." With the evidence presented and arguments concluded, the case went to the jury. For 4 days they deliberated while the city held its collective breath. Social media exploded with speculation about the verdict and its implications. News analysts debated the strength of the evidence and the historical rarity of police officer convictions. Jasmine spent those days in anxious seclusion with her family, alternating between hope and preparation for disappointment, all too aware of how the justice system had failed black victims of police violence in the past. "No matter what happens," she told Marcus the night before the verdict was expected, "we've exposed the truth. They can't bury this anymore." When the jury forewoman stood to deliver the verdict, the courtroom was so silent that the rustle of her paper seemed thunderous. On the count of assault in the first degree, we find the defendant Richard Davenport guilty. She continued through the list of charges, with the same result for each guilty on all counts. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs from Jasmine and quiet celebrations from her supporters. On the defense side, stunned silence. Police officers being convicted for misconduct, particularly against minority victims, was so rare that many had assumed acquittal was inevitable despite the evidence. Judge Washington maintained strict order, immediately remanding Davenport into custody. His expression as the bailiff approached with handcuffs was one of utter disbelief, a man who had never imagined that the system he had served would actually hold him accountable. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Judge Washington delivered a powerful statement that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. "The badge and uniform of a police officer represent not just authority, but responsibility," she declared, looking directly at Davenport. "When that authority is abused, when that responsibility is betrayed, the damage extends far beyond the immediate victim to undermine the very foundation of trust upon which effective policing depends." Mr. Bochters. "Davenport, you have violated that trust in the most fundamental way, using your position and your trained canine partner as weapons not to protect, but to terrorize a citizen because of her race." She sentenced him to 12 years in prison, near the maximum allowed under state guidelines. For Jasmine, the verdict and sentence brought complicated emotions. There was vindication, certainly, but no real celebration. Her physical injuries were permanent. Her trust in institutions fundamentally altered her sense of safety in her own community, still fragile. "Justice was served," she told reporters outside the courthouse. "But justice doesn't heal. These scars doesn't erase the trauma, doesn't restore what was taken from me that morning. True justice would have meant this never happened at all." The civil case against the department settled for $8.5 million, a record amount for the state. Rather than keeping the money for herself, Jasmine established the Washington Foundation for Police Accountability and Victim Support, dedicated to helping victims of police brutality with legal, medical, and psychological resources. This isn't just about money, she explained at the foundation's launch. It's about creating something meaningful from this trauma, something that might prevent others from experiencing what I did. The ripple effects extended throughout the department and beyond. Under the terms of a federal consent decree, the Westlake Police Department was required to implement comprehensive reforms, including mandatory body cameras that couldn't be deactivated during encounters, civilian oversight with actual disciplinary power, and extensive retraining on racial bias and appropriate use of force. Chief Whitaker resigned in disgrace when financial improprieties between his office and the police union were made public. In a move that surprised many, Lieutenant Wilson was appointed interim chief, the first black person to hold the position in the department's history. "We have a long road ahead to rebuild trust," Wilson acknowledged in his first press conference. "But that work begins with acknowledging our failures and committing to genuine transformation of our culture and practices." A community oversight board was established, with representatives from all neighborhoods given unprecedented authority to review complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Sarah Colson, despite the personal and professional price she had paid for her role as a witness, joined the board, working alongside community activists who had once protested outside her business. "Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a cost," she told a local reporter. "But I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd stayed silent." She and Jasmine formed an unlikely friendship and advocacy partnership, speaking together at events about the importance of standing up against injustice, regardless of personal risk. The department's training protocols were completely overhauled, with emphasis on de-escalation techniques and recognition of implicit bias. K-9 units received additional specialized training with strict new guidelines on when and how they could be deployed. In the following election, D.A. Simmons lost her bid for re-election to a reform candidate who had publicly supported Jasmine throughout the ordeal. The new DA immediately established a dedicated police accountability unit within the prosecutor's office. For Jasmine, personally, recovery remained an ongoing process. Physical therapy helped restore some function to her injured arm, though she would never regain full strength or range of motion. The psychological healing proved even more challenging, with PTSD symptoms that continued to affect her daily life. With the support of her family and professional therapy, she gradually reclaimed pieces of her former life, eventually returning to her position at the hospital, where she established new protocols for treating victims of trauma. 6 months after the trial, Jasmine gave her first public speaking engagement, sharing her story with law enforcement cadets at the State Academy. "Your badge gives you power," she told the solemn-faced trainees. "But power without accountability corrupts, and power without empathy destroys. I'm here today because I want you to see me as a person, not a threat, not a statistic, not another." This is what happens when officers forget that their job is to protect everyone, not just those who look like them. Her story inspired policy changes beyond Westlake, with neighboring departments implementing similar reforms before being forced to by litigation or federal intervention. State legislators introduced bills requiring independent investigation of all police use of force incidents, resulting in serious injury or death. The most difficult step in Jasmine's recovery came 1 year after the attack, when she decided to resume her morning runs in Oakwood Park. Marcus offered to accompany her, but she insisted on going alone. "I need to reclaim this for myself," she explained. That first morning, with the sun just beginning to rise over the trees, Jasmine stood at the park entrance, her heart racing not from exertion but from anxiety. For several minutes, she couldn't make herself move forward. Then, taking a deep breath, she began to jog slowly along the path where her life had changed forever. She didn't complete her old route that day, managing only about half the distance before the memories became too intense. But she returned the next day, and the next, each time going a little further, reclaiming her space and her freedom step by step. On the anniversary of the incident, Jasmine hosted a community unity run in the park, with hundreds of participants from all backgrounds joining to show support and commitment to change. As she looked around at the diverse crowd gathered in what had once been a place of trauma, Jasmine found something she hadn't expected: hope. Not naive optimism that racism had been solved or that injustice had been eliminated, but a grounded hope that when people stand together for truth, change becomes possible. "The system isn't fixed," she told the gathered runners before they began. "One verdict doesn't erase generations of injustice. But today we run together to show that this park, this community, this country belongs to all of us, and we will never stop running toward justice." As she led the group along the now familiar path, Jasmine Washington ran not just for herself, but for all those who had faced similar injustice, without cameras to record it, without witnesses brave enough to speak up, without a system finally willing to hold the powerful accountable. She ran with the scars of her experience visible on her arm and invisible in her heart, but she ran freely, reclaiming her dignity with every step. What do you think about Jasmine's decision to use her settlement money to establish a foundation rather than keeping it for herself? Would you have done the same in her position? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this story powerful and believe these conversations about justice and accountability are important, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others. Your support helps us continue bringing these crucial stories to light. Thank you for joining me for this journey through Jasmine's fight for justice. Remember, change begins when we refuse to look away from injustice, even when it would be easier to stay silent. Jasmine's story illustrates how quickly an ordinary moment can transform into a life-threatening encounter when racial bias intersects with unchecked power. It demonstrates that justice requires more than just laws on paper. It demands courageous witnesses, persistent advocacy, and systems willing to hold the powerful accountable. Sarah's decision to record and testify, despite personal consequences, highlights how bystanders can become crucial allies in the fight against injustice. The case exposes how institutions often protect themselves rather than serve justice with internal investigations designed to minimize accountability rather than uncover truth. We see how trauma extends beyond physical injuries, leaving psychological wounds that take far longer to heal than broken bones or torn muscles. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals that true transformation requires acknowledging problems at their root, not just punishing individual bad apples, but reforming the cultures and systems that enable them. The establishment of oversight boards' policy changes and Jasmine's foundation demonstrates how personal tragedy can catalyze community healing and institutional change. Finally, Jasmine's return to running in the park reminds us that reclaiming dignity and space is a powerful act of resistance, that healing doesn't mean forgetting injustice, but refusing to let it define our future. Have you ever witnessed injustice and had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? What would you have done in Sarah's position when she saw the K9 attack? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about police accountability and racial justice, please hit that like button to help more people find it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true stories that expose hard truths and inspire positive change. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Sometimes the most important conversations start with a shared story. Thank you for listening with an open heart and mind. Remember, the path to justice begins when ordinary people refuse to accept the unacceptable, even when speaking up comes at a personal cost. Together we can build communities where everyone can jog through a park without fear, regardless of the color of their skin.